Well, I guess as you can tell by the title of this video, I have played through and finished the JRPG classic Chrono Trigger. This is a title that was initially released in 1995 for the Super Nintendo, then was later ported to the PS1, the Nintendo DS, and even later to the Wii's Virtual Console, and has managed to receive extremely high critical praise. In fact, this game has been considered by a large majority to be one of, if not the greatest JRPG of all time. So naturally, I did have fairly high expectations before I decided to finally play this title. Adding even more to my expectations was the fact that I am in general not a huge fan of JRPGs. Now, this is a matter that I'll get into another time, but generally speaking, they just aren't my cup of tea. So, as I sit here typing this, gazing upon the game's final credit sequence, what are my feelings of this grand adventure? Well, let's take this from the top and find out. This game begins in the mythical kingdom of Guardia, celebrating its millennial year. You take on the persona of the main character, Chrono. As you enjoy the festivities of the local fair, you run into a spunky girl named Marl. Literally. Marl takes a liking to you and joins in with your merriment. Soon, you run into your friend Luca, who is unveiling both her and her father's newest invention, a teleporter. At first, the teleporter works without a hitch. But after Marl steps through, she is transported back in time to the year 600 AD. Following behind her, you discover that the locals have mistaken Marl for the queen of this era. Why would they do this? Well, as it turns out, Marl is the princess of your time period, and she bears a striking resemblance to the queen of this era. But things begin to get complicated as Marl disappears before your eyes. As it turns out, by believing Marl to be her ancestor, the current army stopped looking for the real queen who has been kidnapped, thus creating a grandfather paradox, meaning Marl never existed. Once you rescue the queen of this era, with the help of a frog knight, don't worry, it makes sense in the context of the story, you return to the current era, only to be charged with kidnapping the princess. Despite her pleas, you are charged with kidnapping and terrorism and sent to prison. Considering this game would be extremely short if you just sat out your sentence, you obviously escape, and in a desperate attempt to flee the guards, hop into another portal with Marl and Luca. This time, you end up in the year 2300 AD, and something is clearly wrong. What would that be? Well, the lack of trees, fresh air, and, well, people, for starters. As you find out, in the year 1999, an alien being by the name of Lavos awoke from a great slumber and destroyed almost everyone and everything on the planet. Now having the power to travel through time, our heroes set off to alter events of their past, present, and future in an attempt to stop Doomsday, and hopefully save the planet. Along with just 1600 and 2300 AD, you will also traverse to the year 12,000 BC to see the Dark Ages. Well, it's the Dark Ages for the people living on the surface of the planet. The more tech-savvy people live in freaking floating islands in the sky. But if you're feeling a bit Jurassic, then you can also transport to the year 65 million BC. Across all of these time periods, you will meet new members to join up in your party. Aside from the aforementioned frog, you will meet a friendly robot in the future, a feisty cave woman in the BC era, and another potential member who I'll not name for the sake of spoilers. Although to be fair, this game has been out for almost 20 years now. The main campaign will have you doing various missions in different eras, but what's even better is that some missions require jumping from era to complete. Here's an example. In order for Frog to regain his confidence, you must fix a legendary magical sword and give it to him. Half of this sword is found in his era of 600 AD, and as it turns out, he has the other half. However, in this era, no one has the technology to fix it. A pity for him, but not for you. You return to 1000 AD to get it fixed by a friend of yours. Unfortunately, the material needed to fix this sword hasn't been around for a very long time. Problem? Ha! Not with a time machine it isn't. You then venture to 65 million BC and do a quest for the local tribe to gain the material needed. Once you have the material, you'll go back to the present to get the sword fixed, then go back to the recent past to give the sword to Frog, so that he may regain his confidence and join your party in the hopes of eventually stopping Lavos. Did I mention that this is one mission? Let's move on to the gameplay. As I'm sure you can tell by now, this game, like most JRPGs, functions on a turn-based battle system. But this system functions a bit differently. In each turn, you have a time limit before you take an action, whether it be a standard attack, special attack, combo attack with one of or both of your party members, or using an item. The amount of time it takes for your time to recharge depends on the member's speed, which varies depending on each character. So, in other words, if you're facing an enemy with low speed, you can potentially get in multiple hits before they can counterattack. As you level up, you will gain new special attacks, magic attacks, and as previously mentioned, combo attacks. Figuring out the proper use of these attacks against certain enemies and bosses is key to survival. Overall, this game should take you somewhere in the neighborhood of 20 plus hours, but of course this game can go by much more quickly if you don't do many of the side quests. But keep in mind, there are multiple variations on the endings you can achieve, and even better, this was one of the first titles to implement a New Game Plus feature, allowing for a great amount of replayability. Not to mention, this also alters the endings if you choose to go this path. And now for the reviewing. Let's take a look at the graphics. Keep in mind, the version I'm looking at is the original Super Nintendo copy. Now, obviously, these graphics do have the look of a 16-bit game, obviously. However, the developers did a great job with what they had to work with. There is a surprising amount of detail in the environments, varying from fog that moves in real time to the ability to see clouds fly by when you're on an airship. As for the standard character models, they look fairly decent. Some NPCs do have a recycled look to them, but they do vary from era to era, so it doesn't get too repetitive. And even the main characters all manage to convey a surprising amount of emotions without the use of full 3D models. Moving on to the gameplay, well, this aspect works like a charm. The standard navigation and even combat goes off without a hitch. Well, mostly without a hitch in regards to combat. Now, as I've mentioned, you need to figure out the correct party combination to defeat certain enemies and bosses. The reason for this is that each character has only one magical ability, with the exception of one of them. There is Chrono's Lightning, Frog's Water, Marl's Ice, Luca's Fire, and Robot's Shadow Energy. There will be times when you'll be facing a boss that is only weak to a specific type of magic, and if you don't have the right person in your party, it can end up costing you the battle. Now, most bosses have save points right before you encounter them, and for the most part you won't get screwed over too much for having the wrong members, but this is something to keep in mind. But let's not forget the music. I can't entirely explain what it is, but the soundtrack to this game manages to have a very diverse and extremely appropriate OST regardless of which era, battle, or cutscene you manage to be viewing. Seriously, even if you never play this game, I'd recommend checking out the OST alone because it's just that good. Now let's move on to the story, shall we? Well, this story is absolutely phenomenal. Seriously, this is one of the best put together storylines I've ever played in an RPG, period. The reasons it works so well are as follows. Number 1. These are genuinely likable characters. A trap that many JRPGs and Western RPGs will fall into is having a character in your party that is either annoying, overly angsty, or downright obnoxious. This is extremely unnecessary and personally speaking can really take me out of the game. This game does not do this. Each character is likable and has their own distinct personality. And yes, there are emotional moments and even moments where characters show regrets and lament over past choices, but instead of them being overly dramatic about it, they work together and come out of these tough times as stronger people. Reason number 2. The story, while complex, is not convoluted. The developers took exceptional care to make a storyline that shows the cause and effect of actions across multiple millennia actually makes sense, mostly due to the fact that you work with the timelines and not against them, thus not creating any unnecessary paradoxes. And finally, reason number 3, the individual character storylines. Aside from the characters being likable, they each have their own struggles that they must overcome, thus making them feel more human. Or you could not overcome them, depending on whether or not you feel like doing their side missions. Your call. These missions not only extend the game, but also have repercussions toward the ending. But even if you don't want to do them to get a little more game time, they're worth doing simply because they're just fascinating and very well written on an individual basis. I guess the only issue I have with the story is that I preferred the storyline involving your party to the overall plot. Now, that's not to say that the plot is bad by any means, I just preferred the individual storylines. But I think the game works better this way. You're not some hero who voluntarily went out of his way to stop this evil being known as Lavos. You're just a kid who got himself mixed up in this horrible situation and is trying to make the best of it. So in that respect, that may have been intentional on the part of the developers. So, in conclusion, well, I don't really have to say it, do I? Yes, I think this game is phenomenal. In fact, this is, by far, one of the best RPGs and games I've ever played in general. If anyone is watching this review that plans on making an RPG in the future, this game is an absolute point of reference for how to make an RPG right. But even aside from that, who could I recommend this game to? Well, almost everyone. If you like RPGs, adventure titles, or JRPGs, this game is a must. Even if you don't much care for JRPGs like myself, I'd still recommend giving this game a try, as this is one experience you won't forget. So, as the end screen of this game continues to play the bittersweet rendition of Epilogue to Good Friends, and I look back on this fantastic journey, I can say that at least in this moment, I am satisfied. And as I say goodbye to my comrades and move on to another adventure, I'll always remember the times we had, and know that past, present, or future, sometimes good friends is all you need. Till next time.